man at the corner table didn't move when Mauricio pulled out the chair and sat down uninvited. He just wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and waited. "Aren't you that guy?" Mauricio said loud enough for the whole cafe to hear, grinning back at his friends. "The one who got pushed out of his own company? What kind of big shot ends up alone in a place like this with his kid and no wife?" He laughed. "That's honestly sad, man. Real sad." Nobody at Casa Bonita said a single word. Nobody moved. Then Mauricio's friend leaned over and knocked the little boy's toy truck off the table. It hit the tile floor and broke into 2 pieces. The boy made a small sound. What happened next lasted less than 3 seconds. Nobody inside that cafe knew that the tired-looking man sitting alone with his son had been trained as a Delta Force legend. Mauricio certainly didn't know. He found out the hard way. And nobody in that cafe ever forgot what they saw. But to understand why that moment changed everything, you need to go back to the Tuesday afternoon where it all began. Xiomara Delgado had been raising her 5-year-old daughter, Paloma, on her own for 3 years. Every single morning started the same way. She woke up before the sun came to the curtains, made a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, packed Paloma's lunch in the little blue bag with the star on it, and got herself ready for her job as an art teacher at Riverside Elementary School in San Antonio, Texas. She was 34 years old. She had learned to be strong the hard way, the way most people learn it, not by choice but by necessity. Her ex-husband, Gilberto, had walked out when Paloma was just 2 years old. He said he was not ready. He said the weight of family life was too much for him to carry. He packed a bag on a Wednesday night while Paloma slept in her crib, left a note on the kitchen table with 3 sentences on it, and was gone by morning. After that, Xiomara had stopped waiting for people to stay. She had her daughter, her job, and her small apartment 3 blocks from the school. She told herself every morning that was enough. She had good friends, though Graciela and Berta had been beside her through everything. They were warm and loud, and always full of plans that sounded exciting and turned out complicated. On a Tuesday in October, Graciela sent a text that said simply, "Meet us at Casa Bonita Café after school. Bring Paloma. Trust me." Xiomara had learned to be suspicious of those 2 words, but she went anyway. She always went anyway. Graciela and Berta had been planning this for 2 full weeks. They had first noticed a man at Casa Bonita Café on a Thursday afternoon in late September. He sat at the same corner table near the window every time, a cup of black coffee in front of him, a small boy of about 6 years old playing quietly at his feet with toy trucks. He was always alone. He looked calm but deeply tired, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with carrying something heavy for too long. Graciela was the one who recognized him first. She had been sitting in a dentist's waiting room reading an old business magazine when she turned a page and saw his face looking back at her. Celestino Vargas, the man who had founded Veltris, one of the most successful technology companies in the history of the country. He had stepped away from everything almost 2 years ago. Nobody in the business world had fully understood why. But there he was, every Thursday, drinking black coffee in their neighborhood cafe like a regular person. Berta thought of Xiomara immediately. She needs someone good. Berta said the night they made their plan. Not rich. Good. They told themselves it had nothing to do with his money. Maybe that was even true. They genuinely believed Xiomara deserved happiness after everything she had been through. So they decided to bring her to cafe, find a reason to send her toward his table, and watch from a safe distance while pretending to check their phones. It was not the most mature plan. They both knew that, but they made it anyway. What they had not planned for was the bully who walked through the door. Casa Bonita Café smelled like cinnamon and roasted coffee, and something faintly sweet that Xiomara had never been able to identify, but always associated with feeling welcome. It was the kind of place where older men played dominoes near the entrance, and mothers brought children for hot chocolate on cold afternoons. The walls were painted in warm yellows and deep oranges. The tables had hand-painted tiles on them. Xiomara had loved this cafe since she moved to San Antonio 6 years ago. It always felt like coming home, even on days when home felt uncertain. She arrived just after 4 in the afternoon with Paloma skipping ahead to the door in her favorite purple jacket. the one with small stars along the sleeves. Xiomara followed carrying 2 bags and the quiet exhaustion of a woman who had been standing since 7 in the morning. Graciela and Berta were already there, seated near the back, waving with more energy than the situation required. Xiomara looked at their faces and felt the familiar warning. "What did you do?" she said, sitting down without a greeting. "Nothing at all," Berta said, smiling too wide. "We just wanted coffee." Xiomara looked around the cafe slowly the way she always did when she felt something was off. That was when she noticed a man at the corner table near the window. He was maybe 37 or 38 years old, dark-haired, with a face that was handsome and worn in equal measure. A small boy was playing with toy trucks on the floor beside his chair. Something about the man felt familiar in a way she could not place. She looked away quickly. She was fine on her own. She had told herself that 1,000 times by now. Xiomara had barely taken her second sip of coffee when the door to Casa Bonita swung open hard enough to make the small bell above it ring twice. A large man walked in with the particular energy of someone who has decided in advance that the space belongs to him. He was around 45 years old, heavy across the shoulders, wearing a gold chain and a polo shirt that fit too tightly. He had the kind of eyes that were always moving, always searching for something smaller than himself to make himself feel taller. His name was Mauricio Peretta. He ran a used car lot 2 blocks down on Commerce Street and had a reputation in the neighborhood that was not built on kindness. A couple of his friends came in behind him, talking too loud, knocking into a chair near the entrance without acknowledging it. Mauricio spotted the man at the corner table almost immediately. He leaned over to his friends and said something that made them snicker. Then he walked over uninvited, pulled out the empty chair across from the man, and sat down like he had been expected. "Hey," he said, loud enough for half the cafe to hear clearly. "Aren't you that guy? The one who got pushed out of his own company." He looked back at his friends with a grin. What kind of big shot ends up alone in a neighborhood cafe with his kid and no wife? That is honestly sad, man. Real sad. The little boy on the floor stopped moving his trucks. He looked up at his father with wide and confused eyes. Every person in the cafe went quiet at the same moment. Xiomara felt her stomach pull tight. She looked at the man in the corner. He had not moved at all. The whole cafe was watching. Some people looked down at their hands or at their cups. Others found something very interesting on their phones. Nobody moved toward the corner table. Mauricio kept talking, his voice getting bigger the way voices do when nobody stops them. "You had everything and you threw it away, didn't you? And now you sit here every week like a ghost. It must be something, having all that money and still ending up with nothing that matters." He laughed. His friends laughed the same laugh, hollow and following his lead. The man at the table, Celestino Vargas, looked up from his coffee slowly. His eyes were steady, not angry, not nervous, completely, entirely calm, the way only a person who has been through real pain can be calm, because they have already met the worst and know that loud voices are not the worst. He looked at Mauricio for a long moment without saying a single word. Then he leaned down quietly and placed one hand on his son's shoulder. "Hey, Tadeo," he said, his voice low and warm. "Bring your trucks a little closer to me. Okay, buddy?" The boy nodded and scooted over without asking why. He trusted his father completely. Then Celestino looked back at Mauricio. "I think it is time for you to leave," he said. Just that. No raised voice. No threat. But something underneath those words that made the air in the room feel different, like a pressure change before weather. Mauricio opened his mouth. Something stopped him. He closed it. The stillness in Celestino's eyes was not the stillness of a man who was afraid. It was the stillness of a man who had already decided everything and was waiting patiently for others to catch up. Mauricio pushed back his chair and stood, trying to look like the moment had been his choice all along. "Whatever," he said, waving his hand in the air. But the edge in his voice was gone, and everyone in the cafe could hear that it was gone. He turned to leave, and that was when one of his friends made the kind of mistake that small men make when they're trying to impress someone who is no longer paying attention. He reached over as he passed and flicked one of Tadeo's toy trucks off the edge of the table. The truck hit the tile floor hard and broke into 2 pieces. Tadeo made a small sound, the kind of sound that goes straight through a parent. His eyes filled immediately. That truck had been given to him by his mother before she died. He had carried it everywhere for nearly 2 years. What happened next lasted less than 3 seconds. Celestino stood up from his chair, and it was not loud or dramatic. It was precise, like someone who is trained for situations where every second and every movement carries weight. He stepped around the table in a way that seemed almost quiet, and before Mauricio's friend had fully turned around, Celestino had his wrist held in a grip that was not hurting but was absolutely clear. The friend went completely still. "Pick it up," Celestino said. Same quiet voice. The friend bent down with a shaking hand and placed both pieces of the broken truck on the table carefully. Celestino released his wrist, stepped back, and sat back down beside Tadeo without looking at Mauricio or his friends again. "We are going to fix it," he told his son softly, already examining the pieces. Mauricio and his friends walked out without a single word between them. The café stayed silent for several seconds. Xiomara realized she had been holding her breath the entire time. Xiomara set her coffee cup down. Her hands were not shaking from fear. They were shaking from something harder to name. She had watched a father protect his child with total control, without turning into something ugly, without needing to prove anything to anyone watching. That kind of self-possession did not come from money or status. It came from something earned at a cost she could only imagine. Graciela leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Go talk to him." Xiomara shook her head once. "Absolutely not." Berta nudged her from the other side. "Zio." Xiomara stared at the ceiling, but Paloma had already made the decision. The 5-year-old had slipped off her chair sometime during the commotion and walked across the cafe on her own quiet feet. She was now crouched on the floor next to Tadeo, looking at the broken truck with the deep seriousness of a child who has decided something is her business. "My mom fixes things," Paloma told Tadeo with complete confidence. "She fixes stuff all the time at school." Celestino looked up from the pieces of the truck and found Xiomara's eyes from across the cafe. Her face went warm. She had no reasonable exit anymore. She picked up her coffee, told herself it would be 2 minutes, and walked over to the corner table. "I'm sorry about what happened," she said, standing slightly awkwardly beside the table. He looked up at her. His smile was tired, but it was the most genuine expression she had seen on an adult face in a long time. "Please sit down," he said. She sat, and the 2 minutes became something else entirely. "I'm Xiomara," she said, trying to sound natural. "My daughter is the one already planning the repairs." He smiled again, more fully this time. "Celestino. And that engineer on the floor is Tadeo." They shook hands across the table the way two adults do when they want to appear more formal than the situation actually is. "Are you okay?" she asked. That was a lot. He looked at the door Mauricio had left through. "It is not the first time," he said, and left the sentence there. She understood that some answers are complete even when they sound like the beginning of something longer. She did not push. They talked instead. It came easily in the way that conversations between two honest and tired people sometimes do, without performance, without the usual rituals of impression-making. She told him about her job, about Paloma, about how San Antonio had become home, because her mother Dolores lived here, and she had needed someone she trusted within driving distance during the hardest years. He told her he had moved to the city 6 months ago, that Tadeo's mother was not in the picture, that he worked in finance, which was vague enough that she let it go for the moment. He listened to everything she said with a quality of attention she had stopped expecting from people. He did not glance at his phone. He did not look past her when someone walked in. He was simply there, fully in the conversation. At some point, she noticed Graciela and Berta tiptoe past the table toward the door, both of them giving her enormous thumbs-up sign she deliberately ignored. But she also noticed she had stopped checking the time. That was new. Paloma and Tadeo had decided they were best friends before the adults had finished their first full conversation. The children had tried tape from Xiomara's bag on the broken truck, decided it was not holding well enough, and agreed together that the truck needed to be retired to the windowsill where to look out at the street without being in danger anymore. Tadeo had proposed this with great seriousness. Paloma had nodded with equal gravity. The matter was settled. Celestino watched his son from across the table with an expression that Xiomara recognized immediately because she had worn it herself. It was a look of a parent watching their child come back to life after a period of being somewhere else inside themselves. Tadeo had been quiet for a long time after his mother died. He had stopped being interested in other children. He had stopped wanting to go anywhere. Celestino had worried about him every single day for nearly 2 years without knowing how to fix it. And here was his son, laughing at something Paloma had said, completely natural, completely present, like a child who has simply forgotten for the moment that anything was ever wrong. He's been through a lot, Xiomara said quietly, not prying, just acknowledging what she could see clearly. Celestino nodded. His mother passed away almost 2 years ago. Xiomara placed her hand briefly on the table near his, not touching, just close. "I'm sorry," she said, and the way she said it was simple and true, without any need for the story behind it. He looked at her for a moment. "You are the first person in a long time who said that without immediately asking what happened or what company I ran." She did not know exactly what that meant yet. She would understand it soon enough. The afternoon light inside Casa Bonita turned the color of warm honey as the café began to empty. A few older men were still at the domino table near the door. The woman behind the counter was tacking cups. Xiomara and Celestino had been talking for over an hour without noticing. She was in the middle of telling him about a parent-teacher night that had gone sideways when she noticed a woman 2 tables away holding her phone at an odd angle, clearly pointed in their direction. A few minutes later, a man walking past the front window slowed down, looked in, and then walked quickly away with wide eyes. "Do you know those people?" she asked. Celestino set down his cup. He exhaled slowly. "Not personally," he said. And again there was something underneath the words, that same quality of resignation, like a person describing a weather pattern they have no power to change. She looked at him more carefully. That familiar feeling she had been pushing aside since she sat down came back stronger. She had seen his face before. A magazine, a business program on television, one of those documentaries she half-watched while grading student artwork late at night. "Celestino," she said carefully, "what exactly do you do?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. Then he looked directly at her. "My last name is Vargas," he said. "Celestino Vargas. I founded a company called Veltries." He paused and let the name sit in the air. It landed like something solid. Xiomara felt it move through her chest. Veltries. She knew that name the way everyone in the country knew that name. She stared at him, and every strange look from strangers in the last hour suddenly made perfect sense. "You're the one from the magazines," she said. It was not a question. He nodded slowly. "I should have told you sooner. I apologize." Xiomara sat back. Her mind was moving fast. She thought about Graciella's too wide smile, Berta's rushed exit through the back, the thumbs-up signs. They had known. Of course they had known exactly who this man was before she sat down. They had sent her over on purpose. "My friends set me up," she said, more to herself than to him. "They knew who you were, and they pushed me toward your table like I was a piece in a game." She felt a flush of embarrassment that comes not from doing something wrong yourself, but from being moved around by other people without being told. She did not like that feeling. "I should go," she said, reaching for her bag. "Please don't," Celestino said. His voice was quiet, but had something urgent underneath it. "This is the first real conversation I've had in a very long time with someone who wasn't looking at my bank account or my company. Please, just a few more minutes." Xiomara stopped. She looked at Paloma and Tadeo, who had built a small city out of sugar packets and paper napkins, and were now making very important decisions about where the roads went. She looked back at Celestino. His face had no performance in it, no calculated charm being deployed for effect, just a man asking not to be left alone. She set her bag down. "Okay," she said, "but from here on, straight with me, no more vague answers." He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. Starting over, he said, "Hi, I'm Celestino, former tech CEO, current full-time dad, still working out the rest." Despite everything, she smiled back. "Hi, I'm Xiomara, art teacher, single mom, apparently the target of a practical joke that might not be completely terrible after all. Xiomara called Graciela that same night after Paloma was asleep. She skipped the greeting entirely. "You knew who he was," she said. There was a pause on the line, and then Graciela launched into a long explanation involving the words opportunity. "And you deserve this, and you never would have gone over there on your own." Xiomara listened without interrupting. When Graciela finished, she said, "You could have just told me." "You would have run," Graciela said simply. Xiomara sat in the dark of her bedroom and thought about that honestly. She probably would have run. She would have told herself it was ridiculous, that a man like that came from a completely different world, that she had nothing to offer someone who had built an empire. She would have talked herself out of the whole thing before a single word was exchanged. She knew that about herself, but she had sat down, she had stayed, she had talked to someone for over an hour and felt, for the first time in 3 years, the specific relief of being with a person who was paying attention not to what you owned or what you had been through, but to who you actually were in the present moment. She did not say any of that to Graciela. She just said, "Fine, but don't do it again without asking me." Graciela said, of course, in the tone that meant she would absolutely do it again if the situation called for it. Xiomara hung up, lay back on her bed, and stared at the ceiling. She was smiling without having made any decision to smile. That felt like information. It started with the café. They both went on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and after that first afternoon, it stopped being coincidence without either of them saying so out loud. Celestino would arrive first, order his coffee, set Tadeo up with his trucks. Xiomara and Paloma would come in around 4:15. The children picked up every week exactly where they had left off the week before, as though no time had passed at all, which is one of the great gifts of being 5 and 6 years old. The adults talked, small things at first, the neighborhood, the café, a mural Xiomara was designing for the school hallway near the library. Celestino listened to everything with a quality of attention that was not common. He asked real follow-up questions. He remembered small details she mentioned weeks earlier and brought them up naturally, not to impress her, but because he had genuinely been thinking about what she said. She found herself doing the same thing. She read an article about the early years of Veltris one evening and recognized the problems he had described as real ones, not the polished version that companies give to reporters. She did not mention she had read it, but she understood him a little differently after that. One Thursday, he brought Tadeo's broken truck, now glued back together with imperfect seams but holding. He set it on the table, without explanation. She looked at it and then at him. "You fixed it," she said. Tadeo needed to know it could be fixed, he said simply. She understood that the truck and the sentence were about more than the truck. By the end of the first month, they were texting between Tuesdays and Thursdays. Nothing big, just small things. Something funny Paloma said, a recipe Tadeo had decided was essential to try. One evening when the cafe was nearly empty and the children were coloring at the far end of the table, Celestino told Xiomara the real story behind Veltris, not the version in the business magazines. The real one. He had started the company at 26 years old with 2 friends from college and a second-hand laptop in a 1-bedroom apartment in Austin. He had worked every hour. He was awake for 8 years straight. He missed birthdays, anniversaries, the small, unremarkable daily moments that are actually the material of a life. He had told himself it was all building towards something, that once the company was on solid ground, everything would slow down, and he would have time for everything that mattered. Then his wife, Esperanza, was diagnosed with cancer. She was 31 years old. He did slow down, but by the time he did, she had already spent 2 years running everything at home by herself without saying a word about it. She never complained, Celestino said. Not once. And I think that made it worse. If she had been angry with me, I would have understood the weight of it sooner. His voice was steady, but Xiomara could hear clearly what was underneath it. "I sold most of my shares in Veltris 8 months after she died," he said. "Not for the money, because I needed to stop being that version of myself. I needed to become the father that Esperanza always believed I could be." Xiomara was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "She sounds like she was a remarkable person." He looked at his hands on the table. "She was," he said, "and she would have liked you." Neither of them spoke again for a while. but neither of them needed to. She told him about Gilberto on a rainy Tuesday in November. The café was warmer than usual, and Paloma had fallen asleep with her cheek resting on a folded jacket. Tadeo was reading a picture book beside her quietly. Xiomara wrapped both hands around her cup and spoke low. Gilberto had not left because he stopped loving her. That was what he said in the note. He left because he was afraid. Afraid of the bills. Afraid of the baby. Afraid of the feeling that his life was no longer his own, and he did not know how to ask for help with that fear. So, he simply removed himself from the situation instead. He had packed a bag on a Wednesday night, while Paloma slept in her crib. He left a note. 3 sentences. The worst part was not the leaving, Xiomara said. The worst part was a note. 3 sentences after 6 years. Like our whole life together could be contained in 3 sentences. She smiled without warmth. I kept that note for almost a year. I'm not sure what I was waiting for it to tell me. Celestino listened without interrupting, without offering reassurance before she was finished, without trying to locate a bright side before she was ready for one. He just listened, and when she was done, he said, "You raised Paloma alone for 3 years and became the person she is going to admire for the rest of her life. That is not nothing. That is the whole thing." Xiomara looked at him and felt something shift quietly inside her, like a door that had been stuck for a long time finally moving on its hinges. She did not say that out loud, but she thought about it all the way home and for several days after. December arrived in San Antonio with string lights in the windows of every shop on the street, and the smell of tamales coming from the open doors of houses on her block. Xiomara loved this time of year. She and Paloma had their tradition of decorating the apartment together, putting tinsel on every surface, including the paper dog Paloma had drawn and taped to the living room wall, because she wanted a real dog, and this was her strategic opening move. But as the holidays got closer, Xiomara felt a familiar pull of doubt, not about Celestino as a person. That question had settled quietly over the past 2 months. The doubt was about herself. She looked around her apartment sometimes and tried to see through his eyes, which she knew was unfair. A second-hand sofa covered with a bright woven blanket her mother Dolores had brought from Laredo. A kitchen table with a wobbly leg fixed with a folded piece of cardboard. Paloma's drawings and paintings covering every wall, which she was genuinely proud of, but which was also simply everything they had by way of decoration. Their worlds were so different, not in terms of who they were as people, but in terms of what they came home to every night. She did not want his money. She was completely clear on that. She just did not want to feel small standing next to someone who could buy anything he wanted. And she did not want Paloma to someday understand the distance between what they had and what he had, and feel like a judgment. She talked to her mother Dolores about it one afternoon. Dolores listened and said, "Zio, the biggest gaps are the ones we build inside our own heads." Xiomara wrote that down. She was not sure she believed it yet, but she wrote it down. If you've been following the story from the beginning, you already know that what happens next at Addictive Stories will stay with you. Celestino brought up Christmas on the second Thursday of December in the easy, casual way that people bring up things they have been thinking about carefully for a long time. "I'd like you and Paloma to spend Christmas with Tadeo and me," he said, "at my place, if that works. It's not far, just outside the city near the lake." Xiomara said she would think about it. Both of them knew that meant she had 100 things to sort through first. That evening she called Berta, who was more practical than Graciela and less likely to spiral into romantic declarations. She told her about the invitation. Berta asked immediately and directly, "What exactly are you afraid of?" Xiomara thought about it honestly before answering. "That Paloma gets attached," she said. "That I get attached. And then something changes and we are back at the beginning again, but this time with more to lose." Berta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Zio, you are already attached. That happened about 6 weeks ago. The ship has left." Xiomara wanted to argue. She had nothing to argue with. She thought also about Celestino's mother, Aurelia, who lived in New Mexico and called him every Sunday evening without fail. He had mentioned her only once, but his voice had been warm and unhurried when he did, the way a person talks about a safe place. That mattered to Xiomara in ways she could not fully explain. She said yes to Christmas, not because the doubt was gone, but because she had decided, for once in 3 years, to act as though it were and see what happened. That is sometimes the only way to find out whether the fear was telling the truth or only telling a story. Celestino's house was nothing like what Xiomara had prepared herself for. She had imagined something sleek and cold, the kind of space that looks designed for a magazine rather than for a family. What she found was a wide, low house with wooden floors that were slightly scratched and big windows that looked out over a quiet lake. There were Tadeo's drawings on a refrigerator held up with Texas-shaped magnets. There was a bookshelf that was overflowing in a way no decorator would have allowed, picture books and engineering texts, and a battered Spanish dictionary falling off the end. There were also 3 clearly burned pancakes sitting on the kitchen counter. "We had breakfast," Celestino said, looking at them with the expression of a man who had not yet fully accepted what had happened. "I can see that," Xiomara said. Paloma walked inside like she had been there before, located Tadeo within 30 seconds, and the two of them disappeared into the backyard. Xiomara stood in the kitchen and felt the knot in her chest begin to loosen slightly. Then she noticed a gift wrapped in silver paper near the stove. It was large. She felt a familiar, tightening return. "Celestino," she said carefully, "we talked about this." He looked at the gift and then at her. "It is for both of the children together," he said. "It is a used telescope. I found it at an estate sale. It is old, and the lens cover is slightly cracked." She walked over and checked the tag. It was genuinely modest. She relaxed. "Okay," she said. He let out a quiet breath. "I'm trying," he said. She believed him. For now, trying was enough. That first evening at the lake house, with the children occupied in the backyard and the sun going down over the water, Xiomara and Celestino sat at the kitchen table and had the conversation she had been forming for weeks. She decided to say it simply. "I need to know that what I bring to this matters," she said. "Not financially. In the ways that actually count. I need to know this isn't built on imbalance that will eventually swallow everything good about it." He put his coffee down and looked at her directly. "You want to know what you bring?" he said. She held his gaze. "Yes." He leaned forward slightly. "You brought Tadeo back," he said. "That boy has not laughed the way he laughs with Paloma since before Esperanza got sick. You did that. Not your paycheck. Not your apartment. You, the way you are, the way Paloma is because of the way you raised her." He paused. "And you gave me the first several months in 2 years where I did not feel like the loneliest man in whatever room I was in." Xiomara felt the pressure behind her eyes that meant she was close to crying. She blinked it back firmly. "Okay," she said quietly. "Good." He smiled. "Now," he said, "can we please eat something? Because I burned those pancakes for nothing this morning, and I have been thinking about dinner since noon." She laughed. It came out before she could decide whether to let it. It felt good. It felt real. Both of those things at the same time. It happened 2 days before Christmas. Xiomara was at her kitchen table wrapping gifts in newspaper and leftover birthday paper because she had run out of the proper kind when Celestino called. His voice was different from the first word, controlled in a way that meant he was holding something very large in place by force of will alone. "Tadeo has a high fever," he said, "and he's having trouble breathing." Xiomara was in her car with Paloma before she had fully thought through the plan. By the time they reached University Hospital, the nurses were already moving quickly. Paloma sat in the waiting room chairs with wide, still eyes, the face of a child who knows something serious is happening even without understanding the details. She held Xiomara's hand without being asked. The doctor came out after 40 minutes and said the word pneumonia. Severe. They needed to keep Tadeo admitted, at minimum through the night, possibly longer. Celestino thanked the doctor twice and then sat down heavily in the chair beside Xiomara. She had watched him stay completely still while a bully came at him in a café. She had watched him hold grief and loneliness and the strange difficulty of being a well-known man in a small neighborhood without breaking. He was the calmest person under pressure she had ever known. But in that waiting room, under the fluorescent lights with the smell of antiseptic around them, she watched him come apart very quietly. His hands pressed together between his knees, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the door they had taken Tadeo through. "He's going to be okay," she said. He was silent for a moment. Then his voice came out barely above a sound. "I cannot do this again," he said. Paloma fell asleep across 2 waiting room chairs around 9 in the evening. A nurse brought a thin hospital blanket. Without being asked, Xiomara tucked it around her daughter and sat back down next to Celestino. Outside the windows of the hospital, San Antonio was silver and wet. It had started raining sometime during the last hour. They were quiet for a while. The television in the corner played a weather report on mute. Down the hall, someone's name was called in a calm voice. The building made the sounds that hospitals make at night, low and continuous, and entirely indifferent to the specific fears of the people inside it. Then Celestino began to talk. Not about the company, not about money, not about any of the things the world used to describe him. He talked about the night Esperanza had been diagnosed. He had been in a meeting in Seattle. His phone had rung 3 times, and he had silenced it each time because the meeting was important. He had flown home to Austin and found her sitting alone at the kitchen table in the dark, waiting for him. She had been there for 4 hours. She had not wanted to tell him over the phone. For hours, he said. His voice was very quiet, because she did not want to do it over the phone. That is who she was. He stopped. I spent 2 years after the diagnosis trying to be strong for her. I never let myself fall apart. And when she died, I just kept not falling apart. He paused. Until right now. Xiomara put her hand over his on the armrest between them. He did not move away. They sat like that for a long time while the rain came down, and the hospital kept its slow, indifferent rhythm around them. The sun came up gray and damp over the city. Xiomara's neck ached from sleeping against the wall. Paloma was still curled under the blanket in the shape of something small and completely trusting. Celestino had not slept. He was in the same chair he had been in for the last 8 hours, still watching the door. At 6:47 in the morning, the doctor came out. He was young, maybe 30 years old, with a face that did not perform emotions in either direction. When he smiled, it was because there was actually something to smile about. Tadeo had a very good night, he said. Oxygen levels are back to normal. We want to keep him 1 more day for observation, but he is going to be fine. Celestino stood and shook the doctor's hand 3 times. Then he sat back down and covered his face with both hands. Xiomara put her arm around his shoulders and felt them shaking without sound. She held on. After a minute, he lifted his face. His eyes were red. He looked at her with the kind of openness that only comes after a long night of real fear, when the walls that people build carefully over years come down all at once because there is simply not enough energy left to keep them up. "Thank you for staying," he said. She shook her head. "There is nowhere else I would have been." He looked at Paloma sleeping and then back at her. "I've been building walls since Esperanza died," he said. "Around Tadeo, around myself, so nothing could get through." He paused. "I'm done with that." Xiomara looked at him steadily. "Good," she said, "because I am genuinely terrible at climbing walls." Tadeo came home from the hospital on December 23rd, pale and thin, but smiling at everything the way children do when they've been somewhere frightening and are back in their own life again, and it feels new. He and Paloma spent the afternoon of December 24th building a blanket fort in the living room of the lake house. It collapsed twice and was rebuilt twice, and was ultimately declared finished even though one wall leaned at an angle that made no structural sense. Celestino made pozole for dinner. It was the one dish his mother Aurelia had taught him properly, and which he could not ruin regardless of circumstances. Xiomara brought sweet tamales from Dolores's kitchen, wrapped in corn husks and still warm from the drive. They ate at the kitchen table while the children told long, complicated stories about the blanket fort, which had by now become a castle with its own laws and population. After dinner, Paloma fell asleep on the sofa, still holding Tadeo's mended toy truck, the one she had helped retire to the windowsill at the café, and which had since been promoted back to full duty. Tadeo curled up beside her with his breathing easy and even. 2 children asleep the way children sleep when they feel entirely safe, which is one of the most complete things in the world to witness. Celestino and Xiomara sat beside the Christmas tree in the quiet. The tree had been decorated with a mix of proper ornaments and things Tadeo had made at school, crayon drawings and pipe cleaners, and an aluminum foil star on top that leaned slightly to the left. It was imperfect in every visible way. It was the most beautiful tree Xiomara had sat beside in years. Celestino reached behind the tree and brought out a small box wrapped in plain brown paper with a piece of red ribbon around it. He set it in Xiomara's hands without a word. She turned it over slowly. It was light. Nothing rattled inside. "Open it," he said. She unwrapped it the careful way, pulling the ribbon gently and folding back the paper. Inside was a small wooden box, simple and plain, the kind you could hold easily in one hand. She lifted the lid. Inside was a bracelet made of small silver charms, each one different from the others. She held it up toward the light of the Christmas tree. There was a tiny coffee cup, a small truck that was clearly meant to be Tadeo's, a paintbrush no bigger than her thumbnail, a pair of figures sitting side by side, a little rough in their shape, a swing, a book, a house with a crooked roof. "I made it," Celestino said. His voice had something in it now that was not quite its usual steadiness. "I took a jewelry class at the community center, Wednesday evenings, for the last 6 weeks." He paused. The instructor was very patient, probably more patient than I deserved. Xiomara turned the bracelet slowly. The charms were uneven. The clasps were not perfectly aligned. The silver had a few dull spots where the polish had not taken fully. It was the most beautiful thing she had owned in several years. She looked up at him. "Every Wednesday night," he said quietly, "for you." She closed her hand around the bracelet. There were tears in her eyes, and she was not going to try to stop them this time. She did not say anything at all. She did not need to. The fire in the small fireplace had burned down to orange coals. The Christmas tree leaned its little bit to the left. The children slept on the sofa, without moving. Outside, the lake was dark and completely still. After the bracelet, there was a silence that felt full rather than empty. Then Celestino reached into his shirt pocket and brought out something else, a small velvet box. Xiomara's breath stopped for a moment. He saw her face and spoke before she could. "It is not a proposal," he said clearly. "I want to be honest about that. We are not there yet, and I know we are not there yet." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, thin and clean, with no stone, no engraving, just the metal itself, smooth and undecorated. "It is a promise," he said. "A promise that I am not going anywhere, that I am not Gilberto, that what I feel for you is not about loneliness or convenience or the fact that our children love each other. It is about you, Xiomara, the way you talk to your students, the way you held my hand all night in a hospital and never asked for anything in return, the way you tell the truth even when it is uncomfortable." He paused. "The imperfect moments with you are better than every perfect moment I have had in my life without you, and I have had a great many perfect moments. None of them felt like this." He stopped. "If you will have me, I am in this for everything, for the long way, not just the easy part." Xiomara looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "I have conditions," she said. He smiled slowly. "I was hoping you would," he said. "Tell me?" She took a breath. She had not rehearsed any of this. She was saying it as it came, which was the only way she had ever been able to be fully honest. "I keep my job," she said. "Always. Teaching is who I am. Not just what I do, so there is money at the end of the month. It stays." He nodded without hesitation. "I would never ask you to give that up. Not for any reason. Paloma and Tadeo grow up understanding the value of real things," she continued. "Work, effort, kindness. The kind of things you cannot buy and cannot replace. Not price tags. Not what things cost." He nodded again, more slowly this time. "That is something I think about every day," he said. "Esperanza wanted that for Tadeo. I want it too. We agree completely. And the third thing," she said and paused, "if your resources become part of our life together, I want them used to help people who actually need it. Not just us. Single parents. People starting over. People who got left with a note and a baby and no instructions for what comes next." Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes were bright. Celestino was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have been thinking about starting a foundation. For single parents specifically. Housing support, education access, child care resources. I have had the idea for over a year." He looked at her directly. "I think I was waiting to find the right person to build it with." Xiomara stared at him. You were already planning this? He smiled. I believe in being prepared. She shook her head. Put the ring on, she said. He did. January came to San Antonio cold and bright, and full of particular energy of a new year that actually feels new rather than just renamed. Xiomara and Celestino spent the first 3 weeks of it at kitchen tables and cafe corners with notebooks and laptops and cups of coffee, building the plan for what they decided to call the Second Chance Foundation. Xiomara had written 4 possible names on a paper napkin one Sunday afternoon. She pushed it across the table. Celestino looked at each one and pointed to Second Chance without deliberating. Because that is exactly what it is, he said. For everyone. They agreed on the name in under 30 seconds, which felt right for something that had been obvious all along. The foundation would focus on 3 areas. First, emergency financial support for single parents facing the loss of stable housing. Second, access to education and job training for parents who had left school to raise children alone. Third, an arts and healing program for children who had experienced loss or family separation. The third one was entirely Xiomara's. She had seen what art could do in her classroom at Riverside Elementary, not just as skill building, but as a way through. Children who could not find words for what they were carrying could sometimes find colors, could sometimes find shapes. She had watched a 7-year-old who had not spoken in weeks start drawing pictures of his father, and then begin describing those pictures, and then begin talking about his father himself slowly, in his own time. That program has to be the center of everything, she told Celestino. He agreed without debate. Graciela and Berta found out about the foundation 2 weeks later and immediately insisted on helping. Xiomara said yes to Graciela and told Berta she was on probation. Berta said that was completely fair. February brought cooler mornings and the first rumors of spring in the color of the sky. Tadeo had fully recovered from the pneumonia and was back to his usual self, which meant he had approximately 40 opinions per hour about everything. Paloma had decided they needed a club with rules, and Tadeo had agreed, but was currently in a dispute about whether the rules needed to be written down or could simply be remembered. This negotiation had been ongoing for 11 days. Celestino and Xiomara began the legal work for the foundation. He handled the structure and the financial backbone. She handled the program design and the community relationships. They met with families in the neighborhood, sat in living rooms and community centers and school gymnasiums and listened to what people actually needed, not what a brochure assumed they needed. What they heard most often was not about money, though money was always part of it. What they heard most often was about feeling invisible, about being a parent alone in a room full of 2-parent families at school events, about filling out forms that had no box for your situation, about the specific exhaustion of being the only adult in a house where every decision stops with you. Xiomara understood all of that from the inside. She said so clearly and without softening it in every meeting she attended. People responded to her in the way that people respond when they feel genuinely seen. They leaned forward. They spoke more. They came back. Celestino watched her work and understood something new about what he found. It was not just a person. It was a purpose. And the two of them, together, made something that neither of them could have built separately. March arrived, and the cherry trees along the Riverwalk in San Antonio did what they always do, which is fill the air with pink and white and a softness that makes difficult things feel possible. Xiomara walked to school every morning under those trees and thought about the year that had passed. 1 year ago, she had been sitting in the school parking lot before first bell, giving herself the same small talk she gave herself every morning. You are fine. You have everything you need. You are enough. She had believed most of it. The part she had not believed, she had been very careful not to examine too closely. Now she walked under cherry trees with Paloma skipping ahead and Tadeo beside Paloma because Celestino dropped him off at school in the mornings they drove together. And she thought about what the word enough actually means when you are honest about it. She had been right, that she was enough. She had been wrong, that she did not need anything. People need people. That is not a weakness. That is simply the truth about being human. A truth her mother Dolores had repeated in various forms for Xiomara's entire life, in which Xiomara had spent 3 years arguing against quietly in her own head. She called Dolores that evening and told her simply that she was happy. not performing happy for someone else. Actually happy in the quiet way that real happiness operates, the way it moves into the ordinary parts of the day and makes them feel like more than they look like from the outside. Dolores cried on the phone and then said something had gotten in her eye. Xiomara let her keep the pretense. That was a kindness. They were married on a Saturday morning in April at Brackenridge Park in San Antonio, near the section of the café district where Casa Bonita stood on the corner. It was not a large wedding. Xiomara had been clear about that from the first conversation about it. She did not want a production. She wanted a morning with the people she loved. Dolores cried from the moment she arrived until after the ceremony, and then stopped suddenly and became entirely practical, distributing napkins to everyone around her. Graciela and Berta stood beside Xiomara in simple blue dresses they had spent 3 weeks disagreeing about, and were still technically disagreeing about when the ceremony started. Celestino's mother, Aurelia, had flown in from New Mexico the day before. She hugged Xiomara for a very long time without saying anything, which said everything that needed to be said. Paloma and Tadeo walked ahead down the path between rows of chairs, both carrying small bunches of wildflowers. Tadeo walked with the seriousness of someone who has been given a real responsibility. Paloma skipped every third step despite having been specifically asked not to, which nobody corrected because it was perfect. Celestino stood at the end of the path and looked at Xiomara coming toward her with the face of a man who has been afraid for a long time and has decided, finally and completely, to stop. She walked toward him thinking about the woman she had been 1 year ago in that parking lot, and feeling a simple, uncomplicated gratitude that she had agreed to go to the cafe that Tuesday afternoon. The ceremony was 20 minutes long. 2 people making promises in the morning light, in front of the people who mattered, with the cherry trees still doing what they do. The Second Chance Foundation opened on a Wednesday morning in May in a renovated building 4 blocks from Riverside Elementary School. Xiomara had painted a mural on the front wall herself, working every weekend for 3 weeks, with Paloma and Tadeo beside her passing brushes and arguing pleasantly about which colors went in which sections. The mural showed a wide tree with deep roots and branches reaching in every direction. In the branches were small figures, families of all kinds, single parents and children, grandparents, siblings. The roots were in warm earth colors. The branches were in every shade of green and yellow and orange the supply store carried. On opening day, 47 families registered for services. By the end of the first full year, the foundation had helped over 300 families in the San Antonio area access emergency housing assistance, job training, and the arts and healing program that Xiomara ran every Saturday morning in the large room at the back of the building. Years later, when people asked about how it all began, they always wanted the part about the billionaire and the art teacher, the contrast, the distance between their worlds. That version traveled well. That version got told at parties. But Xiomara would always say the same thing. That is not the real story. The real story is 2 broken people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who saw in each other not what the world saw, but what the other person needed most. Someone who understood the fear and chose to stay anyway. And Celestino would squeeze her hand and add what it said first on a quiet evening on the porch of the lake house, and what had been true every day since. The real wealth was never in the bank account or the company. It was in finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay. This is Addictive Stories. If this found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs it today.